Hi, this is the third Wednesday monthly meeting of the SnoKing Beekeepers Association. And we are going to have a presenter today, but we'll spend the first half hour maybe or so on club business, questions, concerns that come up. And that's why on the screen, if I have done this correctly, you are seeing a winter checklist, things that people are thinking about right now. Oh, and I also put up two pictures of forage for the bees. I have seen the willows blooming in the lowlands, not at my 476-foot little ridge, not up here, but down below. The willows are already blooming and the bees love them. A lot of people think that willows are wind pollinated, and they might be to some extent, but honeybees and a lot of other insects count on them as a food source. And then the other picture is of a little white flower that sometimes people don't pay any attention to, but it's one of the first berries that native berries that blooms in this area. I always called it Indian plum when I was growing up. I think it's marginally edible, the plum that it produced, the little berry that it produces, but it's actually called osoberry is the correct name. So I've got some slides to go through. So looking at like the slide out boards, people might want to share. And remember, you can share screen too, especially I know we'll have lots of time after the presentation, maybe before, and you can share screen. It's set up so that everybody can do it one at a time. So if you have something you'd like to show and you're trying to interpret your slide out boards, or you're trying to interpret pictures of your hives, hopefully not dead outs, but we commiserate with dead outs, okay? We will give you lots of positive sympathy, we promise, okay? Be as positive as possible. When you have a dead out, quite often it means you get to harvest all the honey, and you have a lot of drawn comb, and you have experience. So dead outs can be positive. But right now we are stuck going through this list that's on the screen. We're stuck with the entrances, looking at, checking and making sure they're clear, especially if you are like me, not using a top entrance. You're using a condensing hive system. If you're doing that, then you've got to make sure your bottom entrance is clear. Looking at the ground, because we can do that, check how many, if there's a sudden die-off of bees or whatever's happening, any bees, sick bees start showing up, crawling around the ground. We can check the slide out boards. That's my favorite, all winter long. Checking the slide out boards to see if the bees are still in there, if they're eating, how big the group looks, like that slide out board up there. It looks like they're all crowded toward the front entrance, which is the south end, the warmest end of the hive. Doesn't look like a big cluster, but they're there. And they've been chewing on the pollen patties in the honey stores, judging by the drop, the debris that I see on that slide out board. And it's a great time to realize that your microclimate is not the same as someone else's, like the willows. If you're not seeing them bloom yet, you may be like me at a higher elevation or a little bit wetter, cooler area. So compare. And when you talk to other beekeepers, that's really important. I recommend, some people say just seal up your dead outs, but it's so wet and where we are, I think your woodenware will last longer. Your honey frames won't get as much mold on them. If you just dismantle dead outs once you know your hives are dead and store the parts, or take the stores that are left, and when it is warm enough to go check your survivor colonies, maybe even be able to transfer some of those honey frames in. Or I don't know if the pollen frames would be that good this time of the year. This is where pollen starts to get old. Bees would really rather have the fresh. Maybe, and they'll even take a pollen patty at this time of year, even if they don't really like pollens up. And because the bees are waking up, the strongest hives are going to wake up first. And it may sound really funny if I talk about reduced entrances or robbing screens, but we're at that point where some hives are waking up and the others, you don't see a bee coming out of there unless it's a really warm day. And they're still alive, but they're just smaller colonies. Maybe they don't light getting cold. Yellow jacket traps, I learned my lesson last year. Mine are already out. I hope everybody's repairing and mending and planning and ordering all these things that we can do. So I thought if I run through some slides, it would get people thinking about what they could talk about. This is our malt bee brood binder, and each color line is a different hive. The ones that are fairly even across, the little wiggles, that means they're holding temperature. They're maintaining temperature, and I've got the sensor close enough to them. The ones that are spiking, if they're warmer than ambient, and ambient is this dotted gray line out here, that's the outside temperature in this area. That purple line looks to me like that's a dead out or a cluster so small it can't make it. I'll know if I go in. I think it might be warm enough, especially if I get help this weekend, to go in and check their feed just quickly. I'll be able to tell if that's a dead out, but that's starting to look, see those peaks going up and down on the purple hive? It was the smallest hive. The others, it looks like hope. Even the green one is handling the weather better, the daily temperatures. And definitely these, the top, the black, the blue, the orange, yeah, the orange red. The others kind of iffy, but they are small clusters. I like to put this every once in a while on the Facebook discussion group. Brood binders don't tell you a lot, but they tell you something. So, oh, was there anything on that slide? No. Yeah, we're doing a general question and answer, and then we're talking. I did want to say that spring is coming. How many people have heard the frog chorus yet? I haven't yet. At least one person said they heard it for an evening. The frog chorus is when the ground and the bodies of water warm up enough that the frogs start mating. And there's your Pacific tree frog. I actually have the call recording of this, which let me get to you a couple slides and then I'll try to play it.
We have
a lot of
frogs in Snohomish for a couple of nights.
Oh, okay. So Snohomish, yeah, you're down. Yeah, Snohomish is below 100 feet, right? Or is that Ty? You're actually up a little higher.
Yeah, but the pond's a little lower.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not high enough. I'm too high, and the wind's blowing past. Okay, your frog chorus has started. That's sort of a marker.
Yeah, same thing out here at Lake Bosworth. We're at about 532 for elevation, and it's been going for a couple weeks.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Balmy or something. Wow.
We've had them out in Monroe as well now, and then we had them a few weeks ago too.
Yes. Okay. So it's happening. And it used to happen a lot about the 15th of February. And then the last two springs were so cold. So already that's sounding better. That's sounding like a warmer spring already. And nature knows. And we are at the point where the bees do a changeover. The winter bees raise the first brood, which actually I could see on that graph. The bees have all brooded up. It might, you'd have to look at it over a month, and then you can see, yes, there's been a jump in temperature, even if I haven't got the sensors on those different color lines placed correctly. And that spring changeover is really critical. And that was part of why it's really good to have a meeting right now, because the winter bees have to get the new brood raised. They got to last for 21 days at least of getting those eggs to emerge. And then after that, hopefully they'll still be around. But if they die, or if the brood gets chilled, or anything goes wrong, they run out of food, this is the critical time. And people talk about this, that their bees were okay, and then they lose them about now. So all I can recommend, does anybody have other recommendations, is you check the food. You can't do anything about a queen event, but if I leave insulation on until I'm sure we're past frost. What else would help the winter bees make it? If you think of things, you're welcome to speak up. And some people call it spring dwindle. And I don't know, it could be the varroa mites waking up. It could be, multiplying in the brood because some of them manage to overwinter. It could be, but I don't know that. There are outreach activities going on. There's two students, two members of the club, Scott and David, and they are doing a podcast. And if you would like to earn some points, maybe you've got your apprentice or you're in the class earning it right now, doing presentations and things like podcasts can earn you service points. We also have some opportunities at Clover Park Elementary, and there's a school down in Lakewood that has an opportunity. I don't know who we've got in those areas. And then there's an odd opportunity that I'm going to go speak at the Left Coast Crime Conference. If anybody knows anything about that, tell me what it is, really. I'm looking at it online. And the reason I'm being asked to speak to a little group of writers or crime fiction enthusiasts is because it is the 30th anniversary of a book called The Beekeeper's Apprentice. And Lori King wrote that book and a following, like another 15 books about Sherlock Holmes in his retirement marries a very young wife named Mary Russell. And so the Sherlock Holmes stories get carried on for more decades. They're really a delightful read. But I have to think of something to say about bees. I'm working on it. That makes sense about why bees would be a part of solving and deducing, sort of like what we're doing right now with our hives. The way we see bees and the way we study them and try to anticipate and evaluate, and we do try to be proactive. So it is kind of Sherlock Holmesy problem solving. I'm working on that. If you know anything about the Left Coast Crime Conference, tell me. It's going to be held in Bellevue the second weekend of April. Oh, and under wild announcements, we have a donation coming in of April May hives. And I think we'll have a stack at the Granite Falls if you've ever wanted to see the April May setup. And I think that we're going to be getting enough that we will have another hive setup here at the Maltby. Classes are ongoing. Apprentice is the only one that's going that isn't so far done that you could still join. Journeyman, we're over halfway through it, and we're actually 2 beginner classes are going to graduate this week. Actually, Gina's finishing her 7-week class on Thursday, and I'm finishing the 4-week Saturday fast track on this Saturday. Both beginner classes, but there's still time to join apprentice. And apprentice is important for a lot of reasons. You get a lot of good information, but also because if you are going to do service, for example, outreach activities, presentations, podcasts, or whatever, you are supposed to have your apprentice certificate first for it to count toward your journeyman. And I want everyone to get involved in journeyman. In this last newsletter and the newsletter before, I put in some things about citizen science and some notices about WSU workshops. I decided I'm going to go to that May 18th one in Puyallup. The seminar is free, and then there's some kind of a box lunch or something. And if anybody wants to meet there, I'm going to be there the 18th. And I figured we don't have in-person meetings. Wouldn't that be kind of fun? Anybody want to go? Let me know. Anybody want to carpool to there too? We could do that. We are kind of tired of not having in-person meetings, right? The Pierce County Beekeepers are open to, they invited us through the Facebook discussion group, but I can get the information to you if you are not on Facebook. And they're going to have a speaker that Mary Dempsey, who is she president or president emeritus? I'm not sure, of Pierce County Beekeepers. And she said there is a man who's going to come talk on wasps. And this is his specialty. And she said what he has to say challenges everything we've ever been told. And I really need some help after last year's yellow jacket invasion. Other clubs are having in-person meetings too. Reach out a little. Stanwood was, I know. Snoqualmie Valley, I think was. I think there's other clubs too that are having in-person meetings. And Pat, I don't know if Pat's on here right now. She's willing to set up some in-person get-togethers in libraries. They even have like coffee pots, and she said she'd bring the cookies. Anybody available? particularly during the day, since they want you out of there by, was it 7:30 or 8 at night? So you have to have the room closed up and ready. So anybody's interested, she would love to have you talk to her. And sometimes this works into people just get together once a month and have breakfast together and talk bees. The most interesting thing I've run across recently is these videos in YouTube by quite a variety of people. And if you go into YouTube and you search reed frame bees, you get these interesting videos that are more help on a hive inspection when you're a little more advanced. You figured out how to get the bees, how to unstack your boxes and restack them. Well, this is looking at the frames inside your box, and it's really neat. Some of the people are very good at saying, now here's the bee bread ring, and this is a late season or an early season, or I wouldn't worry about this many empty cells in the brood nest, not totally compact brood nest, because it's late in the season. Or maybe the queen just started laying or something like that. And they talk to you about more than just very vague things. They talk about specifics, and you're looking at a frame while they're telling you it. So I'd be happy to send these out. I'm not sure if I put them in the newsletter. I can put them in the mid-month newsletter for sure. We have the classes. Oh, the next beginner is quite a ways away, March 25th, but that gives everybody lots of time to plan. And if you took beginner before and you want to audit an apprentice and even journeyman, this is true of, you already have the certificate, the manual, you already paid for it. Come on back and you can join us for a class. And if you want to join back in, can be very useful for somebody who took beginner in the fall and is now setting up their hives. And they'd like to hear it one more time. So Monday evenings, that would be great. Just email me. I'll put you on the email list. And I am right now enrolled in the Cornell University Master Beekeeper Certification. I know, but with bees, you can't get enough, right? 2 hives is not enough. You have 4 before you know it, then you have 6, then you get 12, and then you decide you're going to cut back to 6 or 4 or 2. But master's certificates are kind of the same way. So I'm going for another one, and I do like the program. And you get 1/3 off. It's still expensive. It's still a little pricey, but 1/3 off. And although I would really appreciate it, and you just have to be a member. You just say you're a member, actually, of our club. But I would appreciate it if you pay your dues for the year. Since we went to the trouble of making this arrangement, we're somehow affiliated with them. I just said, sign us up, and they did. Okay, back to our houses, because I need to let Dave speak pretty soon. And I said we wouldn't be too long. I see some experienced beekeepers here, and we have to keep it simple, okay? We tell our students, keep it simple, students. You do have to check feed, but you can do that by hefting. Maybe some people actually do weigh with a luggage scale, but I'm the peak kind. And if we have as warm a day as we're supposed to have the next 2 days, I want to try to peak. And I just check to see right by the inner cover, right above, right below. If your bees are coming up through the opening in the inner cover, then I figure they can get to any feed you put up there. In my area with my small clusters, I don't think they can. So I have to lift the inner cover and just quickly slide some more feed under if they need it. Just a little more pollen patty, a little more white sugar, whatever helps. And I do recommend that people not rush out and unwrap their hives too soon. It's a little early. I don't think most people who have wrapped would rip the wrappings off right away, but I would wait until you feel pretty sure that the weather has settled. And we have to plan varroa treatments. Some people start already, so if you want to chime in about what you're doing, some people, I know it's once a month with OAV, and OAV, oxalic acid vaporization, if anyone hasn't already heard this, is the golden child of varroa treatments, because you can do it almost year round. It's not temperature dependent. It may not penetrate a tight cluster of bees, but it can be done at low temperatures and even at fairly high temperatures, as far as I know. I don't know of a top limit on temperature for OAV. But I do say you shouldn't be opening up your hives just to open them up. We have to wait a little longer. It's like waiting for Christmas. You can't open your presents until it's time. And the same for splitting. I really recommend that people not talk splitting this soon. I know they're doing it on the internet in Georgia and Alabama. I know they're doing splits down there, but not yet. We can't. And if we do it too soon, we either chill the brood that is there, or we start say it's a walk-away split and you want the workers to raise a queen, but it's too cold and too wet and the queens can't mate. And then we get drone laying queens. And drone laying queens, I have seen so many of in the last few years. I'm now suspecting that this is a bigger problem than we've ever really realized. That when someone is calling me and they think they have laying worker situations, they may actually have a drone laying queen, which I actually think is worse unless you can find her and get her out of there. So I just ask people to really think it through. Do you really have to go in? I believe that the KISS principle is keeping your bees fed if they need it, dry, housed, wind protected. You got to treat for the mites. And the fourth thing is do no harm. So it's a risk-benefit analysis going into your hives. Please do no harm. Stop and ask yourself, is it really warm enough? Are they moving around enough that they can regroup into a cluster as soon as they need to, which as soon as the sun goes away, it may be that fast. Did you break the propolis seals? Are they going to be able to, and if you wrap, it's not quite as serious, but if you're counting on the propolis to seal out the wind and the water, the rain, can they reseal? Is it warm enough that propolis will reseal when you put the boxes back together or put the lid back down? Hopefully you're just taking a lid up at the temperatures I've been seeing. And can they got to get that brood right back up to almost our body temperature, the 90s. And if there was just a queen in there, up to room temperature, even if it's freezing outside. So thinking about those things, when I ask people to think about this thermometer, if you've taken my classes, this is out of the Beekeeper's Handbook, which is one of the books you end up buying, I think, if you keep bees. And the feed sounds kind of odd because you gave them enough feed back in September. I would warn that I really think that one of the problems we face at this time of the year is our winters get too warm. So on this cluster formation here, that's a very cute. What this line says metabolic rate. Okay, I interpret metabolic rate as how much honey energy do my bees need as a colony. And the bees, they're optimal overwintering. The lowest amount they need is actually, in terms of centigrade, I had to put the Fahrenheit in for those of us who don't think Fahrenheit very well. When we stay down toward the 40, 45, ooh, the bees are doing well. We hit 50. If we go at all over 50 outside temperature, our bees, look at the amount of energy they need. It zooms up. And this is about where I figure I am, is right about, it's starting to get into daytime highs of 50. And if they start flying and there's no nectar source out there, you've really got to watch their carbs. I know those carbs that I avoid like anything, the white granulated sugar, they need it. I don't, so I'm going to feed it to them. And if anybody has pictures they want to show, I'm going to kind of wrap up here, check the chat, and then turn it over to Dave. But always look for that. It isn't just the cold. What was the other thing that did your bees in? And if you've got a theory and you can work on it, you haven't lost. Remember, a dead out still means you get to keep all the honey for yourself. You probably have drawn comb and you have more experience. And add on to that a plan for next winter and you're ahead, right? A dead out is not the end of the world. And maybe it's a plan like this condensing hive over here. calculating where the condensation happened and how you're going to make it happen differently next year. Instead of at the top where those blue cold drips are, you are not going to let it happen there. Maybe you're going to insulate, moisture quilt, whatever it is. And I know that Dave Scheffel, I gotta say it right. I think it's Schiefelbein. When I introduce Dave in a minute, we have a whole list of Nuc Package suppliers, and I hope he's on there. We should have Elite Bee on there. And then after he talks Nucs and Packages, if anyone wants to talk about post-installation Nucs and Packages, unless Dave is covering that, I didn't ask him. And what you might need, shims and spacers and post-installation. What do you do after you got your bees into the hive and you're a beginner? That's a good question. I think I should stop the share there. Anything anybody wants to bring up, and I should check what's in the chat. Okay, people are comparing. Oh, NWDBA was doing hybrid and in-person. Oh, their in-person last night was the Mead meeting, I think, the NWDBA. There are the right groups to join. I actually am a teetotaler myself, but I think they had the Mead tasting last night. Definitely in person. Take your ID. It was a take your ID. Yeah, 50 outside at this time of the night. See, Tony's saying, but Tony's down 25 feet above sea level or something. So he gets it. Okay. Yep. And it varies a lot. I don't know if any bees are getting any nectar sources though. Maybe an ornamental. There was one person that mentioned that out on Marrowstone Island out near Port Townsend that the big leaf maples are starting to bloom. The oldest big leaf maples, and that's early, but I read that the oldest, biggest trees, and it works that way too with sometimes with fruit trees and such, they bloom earlier if they're the older ones. Not just better, not just more fruit. So it sounds very possible. Okay, I'm so glad so many people came. Is there anything? Oh yeah, and then somebody had pictures of the helibores they were planning on the Facebook discussion group. If you need information on the Facebook discussion group, you hear everybody talk about it, and you need an email to you, you have my sympathy. I'm not really into Facebook, so I understand. I'm one of those people who will email you anything you need because I don't like social Facebook, but it makes a great beekeeping discussion forum. And the quince. I just saw that quince is like 100% honeybee pollinated, that honeybees love it. Maybe because it came from Europe. I'm looking at the chat. Ready to introduce Dave and let him get started? Okay. Dave, you're here. Okay. How about I quit sharing? I think that worked. So you'll be able to. And basically, I just know that you said you took pictures of how they make up these nucs and packages that we bring thousands of into Western Washington every year. And I don't know if I totally like it, but we rely on it. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to show us how this is done. Okay, I need to turn the chat off. So can you share screen and kind of take over? I assume that Dave is coming off and then coming back on, logging on a different way, unless I did something wrong here. I think he'll be back in a minute.
I'm gonna say Dave's not here.
I bet he's gonna come back. Dave said he'd be, okay. Dave says he'll be right back. Yeah, he's probably got to work up how he shares screen. Incidentally, has anyone ever noticed I don't have the professional PowerPoint, so I can't do presenter views and such like that. One of these days I'll cough up the money for the subscription. I keep using the cheap free. You pay one little fee and it gets installed, but it doesn't do everything. I want Outlook. I love Outlook mail.
Hey, Eli, I thought that WASBA would help with with the Bee Club presidents and the Zoom subscription.
Their Zoom thing is the 45-minute one.
Well,
And you ask for it like long in advance, and I doubt that they would have a way that you could record the meeting and keep the recording. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. They talk, but
all right.
okay. It's good. Yeah. If you need it for once or something and you don't have it and you can arrange it in advance, get a hold of them, then it can work, but it's for somebody who has absolutely no other alternative. So we'll just play our couple of hundred a month for Zoom for multiple people because we often run like two classes at the same time. So we have to have an account where you can have multiple users. And they have to be unlimited time. But it's a great idea. But unless they changed it, I missed the last board meeting because it was during a journeyman class. So, okay, Dave, you're back. Are you ready?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I want to get all the technical difficulties out of the way right away. So hopefully that was the only one.
Well, people are used to that here because I lead a lot of the meetings and you never know what's going to happen tech-wise. Okay. So the most I know is that you are a honey producer and you do produce nucs and packages too, right? Or bring them?
I do bring them, and that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to share my screen now, if that's all right.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Good. So I'm just going to jump right in. I'm Dave Schiefelbein. I run a small business here in Seattle called Elite Honey and Bee. And thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to talk about kind of the behind the scenes of where our nucs and packages and queens come from. Now, my business here is multifaceted, but one of the things I do is sell bees. I run hives also. I have about 100 hives of my own scattered all over the metropolitan area. But the wintertime, I'm kept busy taking orders and preparing for 2 trips to California to bring back packages and nucs and queens as well, and queens throughout the season. So I got the idea for this talk a couple of years ago. I had he wasn't even a customer, someone who I didn't know emailed me and was pretty upset about the price that was being charged for nucs and packages. You know, he was just angry about the pricing. And I wrote him a rather thoughtful email back. And, you know, he said things that undoubtedly were true. When I started beekeeping, packages were this amount of money, and now they're this amount of money. And all those things are true. I've been beekeeping for 12 or 13 years. And when I first started, I believe the first package I bought was under $100, probably 90-some dollars. So things do change. And I wrote him an email back and I just explained to him how I do my pricing, how I make my price increases, which are based on what my supplier charges me. You know, we just got a little discussion going, and he was pretty contrite, I think, because someone answered him back personally. But his last email to me finished with something along the lines of, well, I know how all those bees get there. They come right out of the almond pollination and they stick them in the big warehouses, and then they dump them in the packages, and guys like you know, go down and get them and bring them back here. And that's when I thought, oh my gosh, you know, there's so much behind the scenes that people just kind of don't know. And, you know, why would they know? You know, they've just never been exposed to it. So that's what I'm talking about tonight. This is the product that we all see and are familiar with, packages or nucs. This is a package of bees. This is what we see. And the day that our packages and nucs arrive, that's a really, really happy day. People are pretty excited. We've just been through a long winter. If we had any colony losses, everyone's excited to fire up those colonies again. Kids go bonkers over it. Everybody loves seeing bees. New beekeepers are extremely excited. They've been thinking about it all winter, and it's their first experience with bees. But we see them when they show up in Seattle or King County or Snohomish County, wherever they show up. We don't see about where they came from. You know, we just want to get home. We want to dump that package into our hives, and we want to get that season moving forward. So I'm talking about how bees get from their source to our backyards. And it starts with something that I call the California connection. And what I'm talking about specifically is the Central Valley of California that runs 400 miles long from Redding up in the north to almost Bakersfield in the south. It's the Central Valley in California, huge agricultural valley. The place that I go to is right here. It's a little town called Orland, which no one has heard of. It's close to Chico, if you know that college town of Chico. The Central Valley in California is pretty unique because it's only 1% of the nation's farmland, but they produce 25% of the nation's food just in that valley in the middle of California. And that includes 40% of the nation's nuts and fruits. Now, a big part of that nut industry are the almond trees. Last year, there were 1.37 million acres of almonds in California Central Valley. That's a lot of almond trees. Almonds need commercial pollination in order to form the fruit. And for pollination, honeybees are needed to provide that service. That's why at this time of year, this is happening right now, mid-February to mid-March, all those beautiful trees are blooming. There's something like 70 to 80% of the nation's bees all in one place and all at one time. Now, there's a whole lot about almonds and almond pollination and monocrops that is not necessarily a good thing, and it's kind of not what I'm going to talk about tonight. But the reality is that it exists. That little town of Orland that I was talking about, they bill themselves as the queen capital of North America. 80% of the queen bees that go out across all of the United States and North America come from that part of California. A lot of the big suppliers are there. Conan's oldest queen producer in the country. They're over 100 years old. They're into their third generation of family running that business. I work with a second generation business called Highcombs. Buzz's Bees is there. Olivera's honeybees are the ones that supply most of the packages and queens that come out of Mann Lake. You've probably seen their name. So I would make the argument, for good or bad, if it weren't for this, if it weren't for the need for pollination in the almonds in California, if it were not for that business and all the supporting businesses, we would not have this. We would not have the backyard hobbyists that we are, because our supplies in one way or another are based on what's happening in California. And I'm talking specifically now about the West Coast. All the big queen producing states are in the South because it's warmer in the spring in the South than it is here. So bee breeding can happen sooner in California than it can happen in the Northwest. But on the West Coast, our bees are pretty much coming out of California if you have any type of commercial supplier at all. So in 2023, there were 2.71 million hives in the United States, 2.71 million bee colonies in the United States, which is actually a tick down from the year before, but it's still a lot of bees. So you need a commercial queen rearing operation or operations, because there are a lot of them, to supply that demand. Now, here in Washington State, we're fortunate to have a great bee research school at Wazoo, University of Washington in Pullman. Commercial queen producers need something called breeder queens. And here in Washington, we've got great figures like Sue Kobe in the middle here, Steve Shepard, the chair of the entomology department, Tim Lawrence down here, Brandon Hopkins, he's the person that pioneered basically the ability to bring European genetics via frozen bee sperm to the United States to help boost the diversity of our population of bees here. Steve Shepard explained it to me one time, something about all the genetics of the bees in the United States came to this country 400 some years ago in boats. And our genetics are stale. And that's why bringing in this germplasm from Europe, from old stock in Europe, is a way to boost our own bees here in the United States. And I've got my little definition of a breeder queen down in the right-hand corner. Those are queens that are usually artificially inseminated. They're selected for a variety of traits. And most importantly, both the maternal and the paternal sides of the genetic pool are closely controlled. So breeder queens, as I said, are usually artificially inseminated. The cost of one of those breeder queens coming out of WSU and several other places is expensive. It's $1,200 for one of those special queens. But those queens go to producers, queen producers. Those are the people that I buy my bees from. So here's kind of the cycle of how it works. You start with an artificially inseminated queen. She is sold to a queen producer like the ones I go to in California. Their people graft young larvae off those artificially inseminated queens. They take the young larva, a process called grafting, and that young larva develops into queens. That's what's happening over here. Those queen cells, which are daughters of the artificially inseminated queens, those daughters are the ones that go into the packages that we get back here in the Northwest. So to support that type of industry and queen production, a really aggressive grafting program is necessary. So are a lot of breeder queens. So we're going to take a look. We're going to take a look at all this stuff. These are all breeder queens in these hives that look like 10-frame Langstroth hives. There's quite a few of them at one of the places that I go to in California. Now, I said they look like 10-frame hives. They are 10-frame hives, but they're modified gear, and we'll see in a minute why the gear is modified. So the breeder queens are existing in those breeder hives, but then you also need what's called cell building hives. Those are the queenless hives that draw out the queen cells, and the queen cells are then harvested to put out into the field so queens can emerge and mate, and then those queens go into packages. So let's start with the breeder colonies. Remember I said that's modified gear. That looks like just a standard 10-frame hive. But it's inside of this hive that the larva is being harvested. And like I said, it's modified gear, and you get a little glimpse of it here, and we also have some better pictures. It's a divided hive. It's set up specifically to produce larvae that will be harvested from it. And you can see it's divided here and here. There's a closer look at it. Here are the two sides. Very small frames go in there. These are support frames of bees and pollen and nectar. The bees from these standard frames can pass through into these areas. There's a single queen in these hives, one of those breeder queens. She stays confined to this small area or this small area. Again, just another look inside of one of those breeder hives. Here's the standard frames. Here are the smaller frames. Here is the division. So this gentleman, when he's going to harvest larvae, he pulls out a little frame. You can see it's just a tiny modified Langstroth style frame. He locates the queen. That's one of the $1,200 breeder queens on the frame right there. That's what he's looking for when he pulls out that frame. He gently picks her up. You don't want to squish a $1,200 queen. And he moves her to the other side of that divided area. So he has moved her from one side, gonna drop her in the other side, or maybe he picked her up out of here, he's gonna drop her in there. It goes back and forth like that. And he takes that little frame and using the funnel, he just shakes all the nurse bees back into the hive. And then what he's left with is a small frame full of 4-day-old larvae, because they time all of this. That's the age of larva that is primed to be grafted and queens eventually emerging from that larva. So that grafted larva goes into special cell cups, and we'll see this process also. Cell cups, frequently, if they're commercially made, they're plastic like these ones are. Some of the queen producers also make their own out of wax. I think I have pictures of both. This is the grafting process. The woman is sitting at a lighted table inside. That frame is full of young larvae. She's scooping out the larvae with a special tool that's called a Chinese grafting tool, scooping them out and putting them into those green cell cups. You can see she uses a scope to view more closely. That larva is then going to go into these queenless cell builder colonies so that the nurse bees will draw out the queen cells, and then those queen cells can be harvested. So this is looking inside of one of those cell building colonies. Very robust colony full of bees, full of nurse bees that are anxious to make queens. So what he's doing, what this gentleman is doing is pulling out a frame of mature queen cells. So larva was put in there sometime between 5 or 6 days before, at least 6 days before, because it becomes a cap cell around day 10 or so. So those, the bees in that several days that the larva have been in the cell building hives have drawn out queen cells. And what's going to happen now is newly grafted larva is going to be brought to that same hive, and there's going to be a handoff that takes place. So this is the newly grafted frame of 4-day-old larva, and you can see all the individual cups. Those, by the way, are some of the natural wax cups. Those are not the plastic cups. And the exchange is going to happen. So this gentleman is going to give his cargo to this gentleman who is pulling out the queen cells from that cell builder hive. Got to get the bees off very gently because you don't want to damage those mature queen cells. You can see them coming into view there. And what's left is a pretty full frame of mature queen cells. So there's the exchange. One person takes the cups. He's going to place them in that queenless hive so they can start the process all over again. And then the actual capped queen cells are going to go inside of a building and into a warm incubator for the duration of their development. So that's just a couple, 3 days. That's from day 10 or so to whenever they put them out in the field. They have to get them out in the field before day 16 because day 16 is when queens are going to emerge from those cells. Sometimes before they're taken out into the field, they're checked for viability because you don't want to stick a bad queen cell into a hive and hope that something's going to happen, because it's not. But in the meantime, they need to prepare the hives that are out in the field to accept these queen cells. Those are called mating nucs. And in this particular case, this company calls them mini mating nucs. Again, it's just customized equipment. It looks like a little Langstroth hive. It's got 3 tiny frames in it, and then this is a feeder. And here's one of the little mini frames right over there. Basically, they're going to fill this with bees. They're going to put one of those mature queen cells in it, and they're going to put the whole box out in the field and let nature take its course. The queen will emerge. She'll hopefully have a successful mating flight, and she'll fly back to this little box and eventually be harvested out of that box. So this particular company actually has an assembly line when they're putting together their nucs. This is a conveyor belt. Starts out by spraying out all the debris from prior season. It rolls through this door, and on the other side of that door is a very dark room. that is full of cages of bees that they are going to put into these little nucs. Now, how do they measure out bees? They use this high-tech spam can. They just dip it in. That's about enough bees for one of those little mating nucs, and they dump it in. I have another supplier that uses an old-fashioned ladle. Clearly, it doesn't need to be a super sophisticated it doesn't need to be a sophisticated setup. The basics work. So then all these little prepared hives are placed out in the fields. By the hundreds, if not thousands, of the mating nucs are placed out in the field. These are what's known as the mini mating nucs. These are mating nucs also. They both accomplish the same thing. It's just two different styles. These are the producer of these has a division in there. So each one actually has a queen on each side. So these have two emerging queens. These have one emerging queen. Doing the same thing, just a different style. All custom-made gear that they make up themselves usually. So here are the nucs out in the field. You notice that they're arranged in a semicircle with entrances facing opposite directions. There's a lot of queens emerging, going out on mating flights, flying back. They want them to be oriented to where they need to go. So entrances facing different directions, just so queens don't accidentally wander into the wrong colony. There's a closer look at that little semicircle of mini nucs. There's a close-up, like I said, looks just like a Langstroth hive, except you can hold it in one hand. Okay, at the appropriate time then, those queens have emerged, they've mated, they've started laying in these tiny little hives. And I say at the appropriate time, a picking crew has to go and collect them. Well, what is the appropriate time? It has to be enough time for the queen to emerge from her cell. They know pretty much the day that happens because all of this is timed. But then it depends on the weather. And California generally has pretty good weather in the spring, but it can rain or it can be a little cool. So they need to not only watch the calendar, they need to watch the weather to make sure that their queens have gone out and successfully mated. So at the right time, they send a crew out into the field to collect queens. This is a queen picking crew. It's usually 3 to 6 people, and they go out all day pulling queens out of these little hives. And this is actually an interesting process to watch if you've never seen it before. These people are all very experienced. I love seeing the different styles that they have. Pretty much everyone covers their face. No one wants to get stung in the face. But then after that, it's just a matter of choice as to how much they're going to cover up. This person here has been with the company a long time. He's got his style down, doesn't wear gloves at all. He wears a knee pad on one knee because that's how he feels comfortable squatted down all day, is stretching one leg out and kneeling on the other one. And that's just how he does it. You can see they're on these special little stools full of queen cages, the little wooden queen cages that you find in your packages. Just everything is close by, everything's within arm's reach. I want to talk about this because this is kind of interesting. That's a bottle of liquid smoke. When I'm in California, it's pretty green because it's a spring, but it's not always green down there. And fire is a constant worry. And so sometimes smokers are needed and they can't get around that. But in this particular case, smokers are not needed. With smokers, there's a fear of sparks going astray and starting wildfires. That's a big deal. The area that I go to is just down the hill from where there was the big Paradise fire a few years ago, when the whole town more or less burned down. That's how fast things can happen. So everyone takes it seriously and they take precautions. They use liquid smoke in the same way that we would use smoke, except there's no fire. So here he is. He's pulled out a frame. He's located that queen. He's about to pluck her off the frame. There she is. He sticks her into one of the little wood cages, puts a cork on top of it, and moves on to the next box. Here's someone else in the crew, again, just a slightly different style. Most of the pickers do wear gloves, but they cut the fingers out of the gloves because that allows them to grasp a queen more easily without hurting her. This woman likes to cover up her ankles so she doesn't get stung in the ankles. So here again is a little frame that she's pulled out. She's looking for a queen, and she's also looking to make sure that queen is laying. So there's the queen, nice Italian. Pulls her off. Into the wooden cage she goes. I always tease this woman because I feel like she purposely matches her nails to the color of the gloves. And once they've caged up a bunch of these queens, they put them into a special frame. So here's a special queen frame. There's queens in every single one of those cages that they've just plucked out of those mating nucs. And then those are going to go into something called a queen bank. This is the queen bank over here. It's frame after frame of mated queens. But they keep track of everything. So this was the day that I shot that picture, April 21st, 2022. They keep track of the yard. It was a eucalyptus yard. There are 63 queens on that particular frame. They're all the same race, Caucasian, and they're all in those California mini cages, which are the cages we most commonly see in our packages. Then all those queen banks, which all contain a lot of different queens, they're put into kind of a darkened area. They're fed. You can see the feeder cans on top. They're taken care of by nurse bees. Those queens will stay banked for a day to a week, I suppose. They're going to go out. They're going to be mailed out to people ordering just queens, but they're also going to go into packages. Sometimes some of those queens are marked, and it's just another step in a rather long, laborious process. Now, remember, each of those queens had to be plucked from those little hives. They had to be put into a little cage. That cage had to go on a frame, and that frame had to go into a queen bank. Well, now, to mark the queens, they had to take that frame of queens back out of the queen bank, get all the bees off of it, take it inside, pull all the queens out of the frame. One by one, they have to take those queens out of those cages and mark them. So here she is, use this special tool to take out the cork that was in the queen cage. She's gripping the queen right here, reaching for her marker pen. I can tell you because it's a blue pen, I shot that picture in, let's see, a year that ends in 0 or 5. So I probably shot that in 2020, I would imagine. Okay, so we've talked about queens, and now we're going to talk about nucs, because I do sell nucs and I go to California to get my nucs. So I want to just explain that process a little bit. So this takes us back to the almond pollination. After almond pollination, there are a lot of bees in California, and before they move them to different parts of the country for other pollination duties, those hives are booming and robust, and there's a lot of excess bees down there. So sometimes splits happen. That's how these nucs got started. These are splits out of after almonds. Those are all queenless colonies made up of excess bees that are shaken into these boxes after the almond pollination has finished in mid-March. Actually, let me back up there. But what they've done with these hives, remember, after a split, these are all queenless. They've inserted some of those same queen cells that they put into the mating, those other mating nucs. They've inserted queen cells into all these nucleus hives. Once again, the process is the same. Hopefully the queen flies out, she mates, she comes back and starts a colony within that box. Now, when I go to California, a lot of my time that I spend down there, 2 or 3 days, if I'm picking up nucs, a lot of my time is spent out in the field. I go down with a companion here, and then we meet another experienced California beekeeper, and the 3 of us go out into the field, and we inspect nucs one by one, frame by frame, to make sure that they pass gumption before we select them and bring them back here. So we're looking for a well-laying queen. We're looking for good pollen and honey resources. Part of the well-laying queen is good brood pattern. But a big thing that we're hoping not to see is any type of brood disease. We don't want to see any chalk brood. We don't want to see any sac brood. We certainly don't want to see any European foul brood. And that's why we are checking these hives one by one. And if everything passes our tests, it's then and only then that we transfer the frames to our boxes. This is what I like to see when I'm inspecting a frame, a relatively full frame of bees, one that's got a queen on it, nice, either a Carniolan or a Caucasian queen. But the thing you can't see so well from this picture, every single one of these open cells has either eggs or developing larvae in it. I'm looking for a robust colony to bring back to the Pacific Northwest. As I said, once everything passes our inspection, we transfer the frames from our supplier's nuc box to our own nuc box, because that's the box we're going to bring back with us. And we do this during the daytime. So a lot of bees are out flying and foraging during the daytime. They're not all in the hive or in the nuc. So we transfer to our boxes, and then we remove our supplier's boxes and get them out of the way, because those foraging bees have oriented to a single place, and we want them to fly now into our box rather than something else that we just left there and is empty. So we're really careful to move all the boxes out of there and put ours in the exact same place as the one that we pulled the frames out of. So then, because bees are foraging, we need to go close up all those nucs before we bring them back to Seattle. And we need to do that when all the bees are in the hive. So we either have to do that very late in the day into the evening, or we have to do it really, really early the following morning. So we tend to do it in the evening because that's the best time for us. Sometimes it's warm and we end up having, there's a lot of bees bearding out on front of the nucs, and we have to kind of smoke them in there to get them back in. Sometimes it's cool enough that they're just in there. But we work by headlamps, and we use our red headlamps in the evening or the morning if it's dark, because that's a color, that's a spectrum of light that honeybees cannot see, so they will not fly towards us. If you use just a regular headlamp in the dark, you'll have bees pretty much dive bombing your head the whole time that you're wearing it. And so there's, we load up our own nucs. We don't load our own packages, but we do load our own nucs. And that's a secured load of nucs ready to go back to the Northwest. Okay, so we've covered queen production. We've covered nuc production. Let's talk about package bees as well, because that's the third aspect of what I do when I'm down there. The whole process of packaging bees begins at sunrise. I grew up in an agricultural area. Farmers get up early, and these are all bee farmers. They're doing the same thing. So starting first thing in the morning. But part of the reason for that here is it gets hot really fast. By midday, 2 in the afternoon, it can be 90+ degrees. These, the people working these packages are all pretty, they're not just veiled up, they're either full suited or jacket and gloves. And you'll see why in just a minute here, but there's a lot of bees. So they're working in very hot conditions with very warm clothing. So it's just best to get started early in the morning. So trucks are loaded up. These are all empty package boxes, feeder syrup cans right here, a couple other specialized funnels. We'll see what that's about in a minute. We head out from the base to isolated apiaries. This is an apiary of probably about 50 hives. These are the supply hives of bees that are going to go into those packages. So the whole thing starts just by a quick visual inspection. Doesn't take too long. You can see those are pretty robust hives. They just pull the lids off of the hives that they're going to work with and get the process rolling. The next thing after taking the lid off is queen excluders are put on top of all the hives. I think everyone knows what a queen excluder is. And then Special modified boxes are put on top of the queen excluder. Now these just look like your standard Western boxes, and that's what they are, except they have slats running across them. So the bees have something to cling to. This is what they look like from the bottom. The idea is to force all the bees up into these modified Western boxes. The bees need these slats to cling to. If that was just empty space, there'd be nothing to cling to. These boxes then are going to be shaken into these containers, big metal cage, big funnel on top of that. We'll get closer pictures of all those things. A lot of kind of customized gear that you're only going to see if you go witness this process. Okay, so they start out using fume boards and smoke to try to drive those bees upwards. Now, here in Washington, if we use a fume board, it's kind of the opposite. We try to drive the bees down. We tend to put a fume board on top of a honey super and hope that the bees will head downwards. They'll get out of that honey super so we can walk away with the honey super. Here in California, the process is different. They use those fume boards and smoke to drive the bees up. So here's the initial colony, a double deep. Here's the queen excluder on top of that. And here's that modified box on top of everything else, using smoke and fume to push those bees up into this box right here. I want to talk again just briefly about safety because I find it really interesting and it's way different than what I do in my personal beekeeping here in the Seattle area. Again, it's green usually when I'm in California, but fires are on everyone's mind constantly. And this is a process, the packaging process is a process where they need to use smoke. There's no two ways about it. They need that smoke, but they're very careful with their smokers. They never set them on the ground. If they set them on any surface at all, they're always laying on their bellows on the side. Everybody does it. It's like second nature to them. They use burlap generally, pretty much all the time actually, in their smokers. And when they're finished with one apiary and they're dumping out the fuel, in this case, they're burying it. They'll throw dirt on that and they'll throw water on top. Or here's another example of an apiary. There's kind of the permanent metal pipe jabbed into the ground. Everybody empties out their smoker when they leave into this metal pipe. The idea is you don't want sparks flying to dry grass and lighting a fire. Okay, I put this picture in for three different reasons, really. Number one, you can see that modified Western box. You can clearly see the slats that the bees cling to. Another reason I put this picture in is you can see the chaotic nature of what happens when you start opening 50 hives, start smoking bees, start shaking bees. There are just bees everywhere, and that's why everyone is pretty veiled up. And then the third reason is these people that do these jobs are very, very experienced. They're like a mobile factory or like a well-oiled machine. So they're very fast and they're very efficient. And this particular group doesn't want to have to walk across the apiary to deliver a box to someone. They just wing it to them. They just toss that box, which again is a fascinating process to watch. I don't think OSHA would approve, but everybody here is quite comfortable with it. So this guy, when he launches the box to this guy, he gives a yell, people duck, and the box flies through the air. It's kind of fun to see. Okay, at the same time that the bees are being smoked up into that top box, there's other members of the crew that are preparing the empty package boxes. They're preparing them to be filled. And you can see once again how many bees are flying, and this is not very far into the process right now. Here's that specialized metal box cage, metal cage. Bees are going to be dumped into. They're going to be dumped through this special funnel. When I bring a 3-pound package of bees back to the Northwest, that means 3 pounds of bees. And those bees are measured out on an old balance scale. Here's a 3-pound weight, all duct taped together. Once again, nothing fancy. The bees are going to be poured through this funnel and into this thing that looks like a funnel. I just call it a funnel-shaped vessel because it has a bottom on it. Here you can see the bottom of it. So you'll see in a second how this process works. But the idea is pouring these bees through the funnel. Funnel sets on a scale. When 3 pounds is reached, that vessel is removed and dumped into a package. Same time, remember the queen banks. All these packages have to have those queens that were plucked out of the mating nucs. They all now are back out into the field, and they're going to be stuck into individual packages. There's a bank of queen, and he's starting to pull out queens. It's got them laid out. Packages are pre-stapled and set up in something called a rack. There's usually 5 packages to a rack. They make them that size so that they load efficiently, but they're not so big and unwieldy that you can't carry a rack around. So he's got a rack of 5 here and a rack of 5 queens laid out. Notice he tends to lay the queens face down. He doesn't lay them flat. He's got them put up here so there's still air circulation to the queens, but he lays them flat because there's so many bees flying there. These queens are going to attract bees. So it's just one thing to keep the bees in check a little bit. There he is putting them into the slat. See the slat right here if you look closely. If you've ever had a package, the queen arrives with the little metal piece bent out over this crack in that wood. Okay, then the excitement begins. This is when it gets going hardcore. Here's this medium box now full of bees that have been smoked up into it. This gentleman slams it down onto this funnel. The bees drop through into the metal cage below. He does this not with just 1 box of bees, but probably 4 or 5 boxes of bees until he's got quite a few in this metal cage right here. Walks across the yard. He's closed up the opening that the funnel sat on, so there aren't a bunch of bees flying out. In the background, you can see someone else. Those are those fume boards. They just look like a big paddle. They've been soaked in a fumigant, like, there's commercial fumigants available. Be Quick, I think, is one. I don't know the other ones. But basically, they have a smell on them that bees do not like, and they move away from that smell. Okay, this is looking at the actual shaking process. Pouring the bees from the metal box into the funnel, falling into the vessel, which is on the scale. Back here are empty packages ready to be filled with bees. It's backing off a little bit. Again, pouring the bees into the funnel, into the vessel, which is on the scale. Remember, there's 2 of these vessels. So while he's pouring, this person over here has taken a full one and is pouring those bees into the packages that will come back here. There again, this is now full of bees. He's going to switch it out with an empty one, and the process is just going to repeat itself until this cage is empty of bees, or more or less empty of bees. You see him pouring, slapping the bees into the empty packages. Here's the scale. Feeder cans close by, because as soon as he pulls this out, he slaps a feeder can into that package and it's ready to go. This is a side-by-side comparison of pouring the bees. Once they've reached 3 pounds, you can see the bees spilling out here. Just uses his hand to close this little door so that no more bees are pouring out at that moment. This is looking down at the whole process, shaking the vessel of bees into the packages, feeder cans close by. These are empty packages, but you can see he already has the queens set up in those and he's ready to go. Here's 5 more queens that are waiting to be attached to that rack of packages. Again, pouring, shaking. I said packages are generally in a rack of 5. Sometimes they're in a rack of 4, and that specifically is for someone like me, whose trailer is set up in such a way that we can fit 9 across. So we have some racks of 5 and some racks of 4. We set that up with our guide before we're even down there. Okay. So remember, there's 50 hives in this apiary. So this process, I call it lather, rinse, repeat, slamming down the bees, filling up the cage. This goes on until the apiary is depleted. Lifting off the funnel after the cage is full, walking across the yard with the full cage of bees, and then doing the pouring. It's pretty amazing to see bees poured out like cereal. There he's slapping a feeder can in. He had just finished emptying that vessel of bees, and he's throwing a feeder can in. Bees are stacked into pallets. There's a full pallet of bees. Notice all the bees on the outside. We call those hitchhikers. Bees just want to be around other bees, and it's pretty chaotic in the yard when this is all happening. There's an awful lot of bees clinging to the outside of these packages, even though it's at this point it's not a coherent colony. None of the bees know the queen. The bees are coming from all sorts of different hives. They're just hanging on is what they're doing. You can see here he's going to lift this up with a forklift. A lot of bees on the outside. Now a bunch of those will blow off before we leave the yard. But honestly, some of those bees make it all the way back to Seattle. You know, they'll hitchhike all the way here. Loading up with the forklift. Again, you can see all the hitchhikers. Putting it onto the truck. They use a forklift a lot of the times. Sometimes, depending on the setup that day, they'll load them up by hand. Everything is strapped down on that open flatbed truck. Once again, you can just see how many bees are flying everywhere while this is all going on. And then the apiary gets cleaned up. Remember, they go into these apiaries and they deplete the bees for that day, but those are production hives. So those hives are going to rejuvenate and regenerate, and they're going to come back to those hives again, maybe in a couple of weeks, and do the whole process again. That's why that the story that I started this talk with of the person that was critical on how packages are made up and it's all in one big warehouse. You can see why that's absolutely impossible. I mean, I'm not quite even sure where he got that. These are bees in the outdoors in an apiary, and they're building up again. So this individual, we don't do a whole lot of top feeding like this up here in Washington, but it's warm enough in California that that's how they feed their bees. So this is a gallon of sugar syrup going in a hole on top of the outer cover, and they're set up for the next time that they're going to come and harvest bees out of that yard. So look how clean that apiary was. It was a chaotic mess a few minutes before, all cleaned up, all the feeder cans in place, all the bees loaded up, all the packages, and we're headed back now to headquarters where there's a warehouse, a dark, cool building, and different operations do different things, but it's all a variation of the theme. You want a dark area so that the bees calm down and cluster up. You want it to be cool. It can't be a hot, sweltering building. We want them to cluster up and be calm because we're going to load them up and bring them back to Washington. Again, the building is vented also. It's very cool. It's not like refrigerator cool, but it's quite refreshing to go into these dark buildings, especially after spending a hot day out in the sun. Okay, this is just figuring out how we're going to transport the packages back to the Northwest. And it's just a math problem. A measuring tape and a calculator. They know how much space those racks of bees take up. They just have to measure the available space in a truck or trailer to figure out how to load it. Here once again is our guy. This is my trailer in the background there. we bring back both nucs and packages. So what this person is doing is calculating how many nucs we can fit in, how high we have to stack them, and then how many packages can fit in and how high those packages have to be stacked. Like I said, it's just a math problem, but I'm glad I don't do it. Someone else figures that out. Okay, because we drive all the way from Northern California to Seattle in one day, that's a 12 to 15 hour day. We need to once again get started very early in the morning loading up. The bees were all packaged up the day before. They've sat in this dark warehouse overnight. Now it's the following morning early and we are loading up. In this particular operation, you just drive down into a pit of sorts. They put this ramp across so people don't have to be walking down into that pit. And then they can just walk straight to the trailer to load up the bees. There's a standard rack of 5 packages. You can see one person can easily carry that rack of bees. We don't load our own packages. We load our own nucs, but they have a crew that loads the packages. And they're fast and efficient also. We use lath, really skinny, thin strips of wood to hold everything in place. We don't want that load shifting from side to side. We don't want it falling out the back. We want it to remain as stable as possible for the 12+ hour drive back to Washington. Yeah, you can see in this picture too, again, nothing fancy about a lot of this. This is one of our trailers. It's just a modified trailer. We've used scrap pieces of plywood. We've left air ventilation slats in both the ceiling and the side. The key to transporting live bees is there's 2 things you have to be aware of. You don't want to overheat them. This many bees packed into a tight space throws off an awful lot of heat. It's really easy to cook them. So we're not really stopping on the drive back except for gas, because we want air flowing through these bees to keep them cool and hopefully to keep them clustered up for that long drive. So it's a balance of temperature. The other thing you need to worry about some is freezing them, chilling them too much. When we go over the mountain passes between California and Oregon, it can be cold, especially in April, before mid-April. I remember one time coming back, one of the passes was 17 degrees. It was quite cold, dangerously cold, really. Another view of loading up packages. Sometimes we carry packages and nucs in our pickup truck, again, just getting them all into place so they're not shifting and bouncing around as we drive back. That's what a secured load looks like, ready for travel. Okay, I'm almost finished. I want to talk a little bit about transporting bees, because you got to think about what you're doing when you're transporting bees. It's live cargo, it's livestock. This is a commercial transportation of full-size colonies. This is how the bees get to California to do the pollination in the almond orchards. There's probably 450 double deeps, 400 to 450 double deeps on that semi-trailer. But what I'm talking about now is the transportation of packages and nucs. So there is large-scale package transportation. This guy is going back to Wisconsin. This is a big outfit in Wisconsin. So he's got a long way to go from Northern California all the way back to the upper Midwest with a semi-load full of packaged bees. That's a lot of bees. So they need to worry about air circulation. This is looking in that very trailer. They move the bees around inside with a pallet jack. You can see all these fans to blow hot air out. I'll go back a slide. No, I think it's a different slide. Yeah, here it is. You can see ventilation here along the bottoms. You know, they're thinking about airflow on these bees, because once again, you know, they're going through Utah, they're going through different states where they're hitting mountains and mountain passes. They need to keep those bees warm enough, but not too cold. So here's an example of small scale transport. This is actually a guy that takes a load of bees each year out to Whidbey Island. Very, very basic setup. You know, just plywood on the side of his truck. He doesn't even cover up the back. Everything is stapled in place so it doesn't fall out. I mean, he's not even closing the tailgate. This is kind of middle size package transportation, fifth wheel trailer with on a pickup truck, dual axles. That's a pretty big trailer. That's going to hold a lot of bees, which is a lot of weight. He's going to Montana, so he's got a little bit of a trip out in front of him too. He's got air ventilation holes here, over on the other side, also up on top, and then in the back. He's got air flowing through that particular trailer. This has been my method through the years. Started out much smaller. We just rented U-Haul trailers and we modified them with plywood. Always a pickup truck, preferably a four-wheel drive pickup truck, because sometimes we take some pretty muddy field roads to pick up our nucs. You don't want to get stuck out in an almond grove. We graduated, as we started hauling more bees and selling more packages and nucs, we graduated in size and we started using horse trailers, again, dual axle. Horse trailers are nice because they're already meant to carry live cargo. They're meant to carry horses. So they're ventilated pretty well, but they're also super heavy and kind of unwieldy. So this is what we've graduated to now. Again, four-wheel drive pickup. We've modified a trailer. It's a little hard to see. I have one more shot where you can see it better. Dual axles, because the weight of our bees and the weight of our trailer can be 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. So you need a hefty truck and a solid trailer to pull that weight. But what we have here, the way we've modified our trailer is that's pegboard, which is just commercial pressed board with a lot of little holes in it. And what we assumed, and it's worked pretty well from when we first started doing this, that allows some air circulation because of the tiny holes. It allows air to flow in as we're rolling down the highway, but it's not so much air that it's blasting and chilling the bees as we go. And we make that trip back to Seattle in one day, so we always like to joke that we're as fast as any Amazon Prime that's out there. We're delivering our bees in 24 hours. This is a look inside of one of our trailers. You can see the pegboard a little better. You can see those tiny holes. Real tiny, but that's plenty of ventilation to keep our bees cool enough for the trip back to Washington. Like I said, then we get back the same day, but it's pretty much always after 8 o'clock at night, so it's dark. And we stack our bees up in a garage. It's like a mini version of the warehouse that they were in California. We keep fans running in there. We keep it dark. We try to keep it cool. We want the same thing that they wanted in California. We want these bees to calm down. We want them to cluster up. And we want a good-looking product to deliver to our customers, which come the following morning. They start coming at 9 o'clock in the morning on the following day. And this is my last slide. I maintain a queen bank throughout the season. That's my version of what you saw is going on in California. I sell these queens throughout the season. Those are for people that want to do splits, or that a queen's gone missing, or they don't have time for their hive to make their own queen. We also do supply queens pretty much from April 15th to October 1st. Okay, that's all I have. Again, my name's Dave. My company is Elite Honey and Bee. If you want to look me up online, that's Elite Honey and Bee, all spelled out, or if you've got your smartphone, there's a QR code. You can pull it up using your phone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. That's it. That's amazing. Have you ever been on Micro's? I think that this should be on Micro's Dirtiest Jobs, most dangerous jobs. Remember that show?
It would be exciting, wouldn't it? I mean, yeah. That guy's done a lot of odd, dangerous jobs, but he would get an eyeful if he went and witnessed this process.
Yeah, anybody says it costs too much for the packages and nucs, yeah, There's a lot of steps. And when you summarized it, I realized just in the raising queens how many steps there are, because the last couple of years we've been doing a very small scale queen raising workshop here at our apiaries, and just timing the steps, not missing a day, because it screws everything up. It just that part is amazing. And then all the rest of the logistics, that was just wonderful.
Yeah, you know, it's in the United States, it's a whole industry. And, you know, sometimes we can frown on that, and that doesn't make it go away. But yeah, our agricultural system is based on honeybees. And to make that happen, you need a lot of supporting steps that are part of that process.
Yeah, and actually having someplace to put some of the excess bees, when you fed them that well on the pollination contracts, it does all work, doesn't it? And the European honeybee, because that's really what our honeybee is, it really likes the European crops. I assume almonds come from there, and all those fun things that if we didn't have honeybees, I often think we'd have to eat what, beans, rice, and squash. I mean, really, it would limit our
Something like
diet,
that.
or the cost would go up so high. Yeah. Wow. Thanks. I can see the comments coming in on the chat. Can you see
Okay.
those? Can you
I'm
see
not-
those?
I'm gonna stop my screen share now.
Okay, but you got to look at those comments because it's impressive. Absolutely impressive. And that's what everyone's saying. Are you on the WASBA speaker list? Did you know they have a speaker list? And it goes out to all the clubs, people that they can call to do presentations for their clubs.
Yeah, well, I'm learning this. I did more or less this same talk just a week ago for WASBA. They have a Facebook group,
Right.
and I did the talk for that group.
The live stream. So if someone
Yeah,
misses it here, was the
Yeah.
Facebook live stream,
It's called Ask a Beekeeper.
right? And it's the second or third Thursday of the month or something.
Well, I did it February 15th, so it's whatever
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah, wow. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? That was pretty thorough. I think I'd have to watch it again to get all the details, because there were so many steps of so many things that have to be done at a certain time. And the do-it-yourself parts, that's really neat.
Yeah, so this is Randy, and my husband and I drive down to Palm Springs usually in early March. And so we drive right by the area that he was describing. And I used to not pay attention to it before, but in the past couple of years, I'm fascinated seeing all the hives out there.
Mhm.
And what was sad last year was how wet it was. I mean, it was real, a lot of the stuff was underwater. So I'm hoping that they have a better time this year. But it is fascinating seeing all those hives sitting out among those trees.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on last year was an extremely unusual winter and spring in California. Lots of water, even snow in the orchards. We have pictures of hives covered in snow. And that, of course, that affects the whole almond industry, but it also has an indirect on us up here if you're relying on California for your bees. Our whole, this year I'm distributing mid-April and then again at the end of April. Last year it got pushed back by at least 2 weeks because of that weather that you're referring to. It just wasn't good mating weather. Bees were late coming out of almonds. It was pretty messed up.
Good for the lakes down there, but
Yeah.
not so
Yeah,
good for the almonds.
None of those Californians were complaining too much about the water. They were fortunate, and that's the thing. It was a mess, but ultimately it's also very good for the bees because there's going to be a lot of natural forage for them. The dearths weren't going to be as long. There'd be less artificial feeding of the bees. It was a good thing overall, for sure.
It was interesting about the smokers too. I'm going to have to incorporate that idea if you can lay the smoker down on the bellows. I had never seen that. That's a really neat technique.
Yeah, it is good. And, I have a very, he was in a couple of the shots, the California beekeeper that I hook up with down there. I see him on a regular basis and we work his bees in California. He doesn't use smoke down there. The way I just kind of use it second nature up here, I just kind of always have a smoker going. They don't necessarily do that down there. If they don't need it, it's not even lit.
Wow, this presentation was just so neat. Anyone else? Because there were so many things in it. I'm going to have to watch it again. Yeah.
Figure out how to go down and watch it in person.
Okay.
That's what these we get a lot of complaints about bees coming out of California. And when I see these businesses and they're family-run businesses, generational businesses, when I see the care that they put into making their product, when I see the responsibility that they have in their communities because they have 30, 40 full-time employees, they're just nice people. And they're happy to show off what they do. It's not some big, bad corporate farming. It's far from it. It's all family businesses.
Yeah, farming, it's difficult, but the people who do it, the only way they can do it is they love it. It's their
Yeah,
it's their
absolutely.
life.
Absolutely.
It is. Yeah. Wow. Oh, one thing was you checking every nuke. I was really impressed by that when you pick them up, you don't just go down there and pick up hundreds of nukes. You look at each one and then you do the transfer into your own nuke boxes. That's kind of reassuring to me if I'm buying. I would
Well,
want to know that you did
yeah,
look at
thank
it.
you. Not everyone does it that way.
Mhm.
Even the supplier that I use, I've seen people just pull in there with their
Right.
flatbed and load up 400 nukes. So it's a situation that we have asked for, and our supplier works with us. He trusts us to go out in the field and go. We have an established relationship with him now. But yeah, not everybody does that, but we like doing that. And there's so many bees in California, and disease is a stronger possibility, particularly with a nuke, but also in an area that has as many bees as California does. So we're just trying to be careful to keep the bad stuff there and make sure that we only bring back something that passes the test.
Yeah, I was really reassured to see that because I am sure that's not the case with some other places that I've seen where the nukes are delivered, and they're highly variable as to what's in the load. And if nukes were made up way in advance by the people who are there and they're in the final package and you pick them up, the ones that were made a week or two earlier, I assume it's a small crew operation that I'm thinking of. The first ones, all the larvae had emerged, the stores were used up, and it wasn't the same nuke that had been put together perhaps 2 weeks earlier.
Well, that's interesting. There's another thing about nukes that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me. I mean, the definition of a nuke in my mind is an established colony with an accepted queen, and all the offspring in that colony belong to that queen. Frequently, and it's true up here, and I suppose sometimes in California, frequently people will they'll do a split, put a bunch of bees in a 5-frame box, put a cage queen in there, and they call it a nuke. But that's not what we're delivering. We call them aged nukes because they were set up 3 to 4 weeks out in the field before we even got down there.
That's really good because they're still saying that cage queens have as high as a 25% supersedure. Maybe they don't die, but they don't get completely accepted. They start to lay, and it's especially hard for beginner beekeepers who don't understand what's happening. And they get this delay where there's not the brood being raised because the bees are busy raising out a new queen and rejecting the one that did manage to make it out of the cage. And so that really is helpful if it really is an aged nuke. I hadn't heard that term. But yeah, the ones I'm thinking of, they are the caged type queen ones. You stick the cage in, the queen in. And then a lot of people up here are buying nukes where they think the queen was the mother of the offspring. They think that's the queen that laid the eggs and the larvae that they see in there. And it isn't, because what it really is they're putting those nukes together, slamming them together, and they're sticking the caged queens in. And people who are later picking up never see the queen because the people who buy the nukes release the queen. And if you don't ask, they don't tell. If you didn't ask, you don't get told. So in our beginner and our classes, we have a list of questions that people should ask if they're buying nukes, and you've answered a lot of them. Nukes are packages, and one of them is this the queen who laid those eggs and the larvae?
Right.
Because a lot of people don't realize the nukes are arriving, and after they've sat for a few days, the queen can be released. And if you are careful, you can do a lot of direct releasing, which I don't recommend to beginning classes at all. But commercial people can do it, especially if the nuke has the aged comb and the bees are already there and it's all different ages. You got brood pheromone. And so direct release can work. But things can go wrong too, and it's not what they thought they bought.
Well,
So,
I'm glad that your club stresses being educated about what you're buying. I would never say, oh, people shouldn't be allowed to sell that, but if people ask the question, they should reveal the process.
yeah, and sometimes people don't realize that's why one nuke is skimpier than another, is because the bees did not emerge there, and that their loyalty isn't there to that box. So if the nuke is opened up even just to fly for a short while, they aren't going to be staying there. And it isn't what they thought they bought, which is okay. If you drop the price of the nuke and you're buying a number of nukes and it's an agreement, everybody understands what they're buying, it's great. But I like it way better.
There's another aspect to all of that as well. Coming from the side of someone who sells bees, we want our customers to be happy. So if there's an issue, this nuke isn't as full as I hoped it would be, or whatever it might be, we really try to stand behind, and it will work. Particularly our queen warranties. We just try to stand behind it. We don't want to just pass something off and then act like we have nothing to do with it. We'll try to make it right for sure.
Queen warranties, that's one of the things that we tell people they should ask about. At least a discounted price on another queen, or can they bring the queen back and say, this queen is dead in the cage? Clearly. Also, it's important to tell beginners when they install, they should be looking to see if the queen is alive, if it's in a cage. Because if they don't look right when they get it, they don't know if it died after they got it. It's their responsibility to check. Look at the cage, see if the queen is alive. But I hate the corks. The one thing is I really hate those little corks at the end of the wooden screen cages.
Why do you hate those?
You're supposed to take it out and put the little mini marshmallow in.
Mm-hmm.
The number of beginning beekeepers who fumble that, and the number of videos where it shows having big, heavy, thick leather gloves on. There's no way that you're going to succeed in doing that with big, thick, heavy gloves, getting that cork out and getting that marshmallow in. I have resorted to, and I don't even know if this is really a good idea, but I have resorted to telling people, if you get stuck with that situation, have your tweezers ready. At the most, you wear the disposable gloves. You try to distract the queen, but even better, take some sugar syrup, which a lot of people use to install their packages. It makes the bees kind of clump together and not fly up. So, okay. and squirt the queen, which may sound terrible, but it distracts her so she does not race out that hole. And I can get the mini marshmallow in there. And the other thing is to make it 2 steps. Have the tweezers ready, pull cork out, thumb over, mini marshmallow. Actually, spray queen, tweezers, pull cork out, thumb over, pick up mini marshmallow, check queen again, put the mini marshmallow in. Okay, obviously I'm one of those people who, when I started, lost the queen.
Did you?
And then I was also told by experienced beekeepers, no problem, just direct release the queen. That doesn't work when you have blank, bare foundation and you're releasing a queen, for example, in a package, onto bare foundation that doesn't smell like a hive. I think the reason that the commercial beekeepers can go down and do direct release down a line of hives is because they've got every hive has that really good smell. All that old comb, propolis, good smell of a hive. And the queen goes down instead of up. Maybe I just had bad luck.
Well,
But
I mean, it's a new beekeeper has so many things to think about, and it's actually, as a club, you could do dry runs, you could do practice runs with beginners, just
Yeah.
walk them through a mock install with all the steps. But yeah, the heavy gloves, that's a little rough to try to get a cork out with heavy gloves. I don't see how that would be possible either.
Yeah, and I don't think I'd even try it with a knife. I think you got to have like the tweezers there. Seriously, thumb over, cork out, thumb over, thumb back off, marshmallow. And I think that we should get a video of doing that for people like me who have managed to screw that up. And you're watching that queen sail off, you know. So it's in my instructions if people read my Nuc install or package install instructions. It happens, freeze in place, make like a tree, hold still. Pray she comes back. She didn't.
It doesn't happen. I always caution people about it, but inevitably there's 1 or 2. I'll get the report. Queen flew off, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
oh well, it happens.
Yeah. But I figure the sugar syrup probably doesn't bother her, a little spritz that distracts her. Even a
You
little bit
know,
of water.
I always tell beekeepers, find what works and stick
Yeah.
with it.
Not soaking her. I just don't trust her to not race out that hole the minute she gets a second. Oh. Yeah, I think we should do that. We should do a video of that, videotape, okay? One of my journeyman candidates can do it for service.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions? I think it was just so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wasn't really monitoring chat for questions, so if people have questions, they should speak up right now.
Mainly it just says fabulous, nice to see the entire process, great presentation, so fascinating, absolutely worth the cost. They want to get bees from you. So such a great talk, more fascinating. You are a fascinating presenter. Yeah.
Well, thank you. You know, I think the pictures kind of, when you can see that process, that's what's fascinating about it.
It is. And I don't know of any other video on YouTube or anywhere because I've actually looked for one. And the closest I could find was like a commercial operation that showed it quickly, showed the big funnels, but not in that kind of detail, not from beginning to end.
You know, this is one thing that makes me smile a little bit. You know, I'm all for taking care of our bees, but I do have people up here that are really worried about shaking bees into their hives. I think about what those bees have been through before they got here, and that's just get them in the hive, because that's pretty mild compared to all the other chaos that they've just lived through.
Yes, we have to warn beginners about on the internet, it will have all these elaborate release methods. I can't believe it. And first of all, it's often raining or sprinkling. And the people with a paycheck job who pick up their bees on Thursday or Friday, and we warn them, put them in a cool, dark place out of the wind. is if it's a package, especially get them in the dark, get them cool, like 50, 55. And their syrup is probably holding out fine, but you could spray some on the outside of the screen. Okay, but you're going to have to wait. You get the chance to run out there on Saturday when the kids don't need you. There's no soccer practice. And then, of course, Sunday is church. Okay, so they got these couple of minutes to run out there. Warn them, have everything ready to go. And you just have to do it. And if somebody has to hold the umbrella over you, you do it. You don't have time for these slow release, crazy things where you take most of the frames out of a 10 frame deep, put the box inside or stick it upside down, and the bees sometimes won't leave. And then they start to build comb because that's their home and it smells like queen pheromone. And bees have no problem building their own, especially if you're putting them on blank foundation. Why would they not stay in the box that they came in? And then there's other ones where you want them to march up into the hive so that they've chosen it and won't swarm off. It's so elaborate. There's like a half dozen of these methods, and people take them seriously. And I worry about my beginners sometimes because I try so hard to explain it's much simpler than that. Bees love to group. They love to hang out together. Yeah, so I'm glad you showed it where they've been dumped from all these different hives and they form a group. They want to cluster.
It's
You
true.
get
And
them a queen.
that process is happening from the moment they're in that package, that because there's the queen and her pheromones are in there. So they are becoming accustomed to that queen. So usually by the time she gets up here, she's been in that, they've been in the package box 2 days, sometimes 3. So they are starting to get accustomed to each other by that time. They're well on the way.
And they form that wonderful concatenary curve they like to talk about, and it's shifted to the side the queen cage is on. I try to show that in a beginner class in the pictures because you start to understand how your bees think. And yes, they don't need gentle introduction. They would rather have a good smack on the back of the box, wrap it on the ground once, turn it upside down, smack it again. They like tough love. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
And you're welcome to stay and see if anybody has any other questions, but we'll probably wander off onto whatever people want to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, let's just say if there are questions, people be brave enough to ask right now. And if there are no questions, I will probably exit.
Okay. I think they would be.
Yeah. Hey, Eli, this is Heidi. Hey, Dave. Just some of the experiences that I've had moving my hives around. They're pretty pissed off at me for doing that and making them move. So just curious, when they're going through all this transition, and they're going through several transitions, I'm kind of wondering what the tone is. Are they attacking each other? Are they just, looks like that one, you had a couple of slides where they were just hanging out. You said they were just hanging out, hanging off the outside of the boxes. And I'm just kind of curious, is there any aggression involved at all? Like they're trying to defend their hive or defend their space?
Well, the answer is it's the opposite of that. I'm not saying that there never would be any aggression, but not in any organized fashion. The fact is they don't have a home, and all they really want to do is be put into a home. That's where their instincts lie. That's why I'm also a proponent of dumping them into a hive as quickly as you can, just getting them in there. That's what they want. They just want a new home. They want to act on that instinct of forming a cohesive colony again. So no, I don't find any extra aggression. When we're unloading bees, there's a lot of what we call them hitchhikers. There's a lot of bees on the outside of those packages as I'm taking them off our trailer, and they don't bother us. It's, if I put my hand on one, I might get stung, but they're not looking for anything except to hang out with other bees, really.
Kind of
One
like a swarm, right? I'm sorry, but it's kind of like a swarm. They're waiting to go to a home.
Yeah, they are. That's the next thing on their agenda. You know, people call packages an artificial swarm, and I guess that's what they're talking about. You know, it's a group of bees looking for a place to live. It's not quite a swarm because they aren't necessarily used to the queen yet. That's why we do a marshmallow release of a queen. It just gives them a little more time for her pheromones to interact with them. But yes, it's like a swarm in that the only thing that's on their mind is finding that cavity, finding that space that they are going to establish a new colony.
What are the breed of beads that you're transporting or you're getting from this company?
Yeah, so I work with Hikums, that's out of Orland, California. But they work, there's a Washington connection there, but the short answer to your question is we sell 3 races of bees: Italian, New World Carniolan, and Caucasian. Both the Caucasian and the Carniolans have that. They're not being produced in the Northwest, but the genetics and the breeder queens are coming from the Northwest. That's why WSU is a hugely valuable resource. And Sue Colby and Tim Lawrence living, you know, on Whidbey Island, it's amazing that we have those people very, very close to where we live.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Actually, Dave, what's your opinion on the different strains? Do you really feel like there's a difference in honey production and winter hardiness, and or is it just the diversity of the genetics that you?
Well, there is a difference, and it is the diversity of the genetics. So in California, because of almonds, they're running Italians down there, and they think we're nuts up here for having a preference of a darker bee, which is the Carniolan or the Caucasian. And most people it's Carniolan, but that's because Caucasians are sort of newer on the market. I think that will level out. I can tell you my customers prefer by at least 3 to 1 a darker bee, so the Carniolans over an Italian. That's just what people in the Northwest generally want. There are people that love Italians, and that's all they want, and they like that fast buildup, and they like big colonies. But for overwintering and flying on those cooler, wetter days, yeah, I think there's a difference. And inevitably, my own supply of bees, sometimes I get what's left over after everyone else has theirs. So I do have Italians also, but I run a majority. If I had my choice, I run dark bees all the time, all the time. There's I forgot to talk on the one slide about one of the people, Megan Mahoney, is a producer out of Texas and North Dakota. So that seems like it has nothing to do with the Northwest. She uses some of the sperm from WSU for her works, but I think she's someone to watch, Megan Mahoney, and you could find her on YouTube already. She is a queen breeder, and I feel like she's up and coming. I feel now that Sue Colby has retired, I feel like she's going to be the next person to jump onto the scene. Trying to get her, I've already started talking to her about coming and addressing our bee clubs next January to see if she has any interest in that, and she's expressed some interest.
That sounds great. I have one comment that came through the chat. I confused people when I talked about caged queens and nucs. This was something that the WASBA manual was written that nucs were 5 frames with a queen who had laid those eggs. That was her larvae, and some of the adult offspring were hers as well. And I informed them that I knew that was not the case. And I knew that it was not always being done that way. And they were surprised, and they did change the manual because they found out it was true. So it says there was a little discussion about caged queens and the nukes, but I thought caged queens were only in packages. Could you please explain your nukes again? Yours are definitely not that.
They definitely are not. I'll say it real quickly here. The nukes were made up out in the field, so that was a queenless colony. A queen cell is put in that queenless colony. A queen emerges, flies out and mates, comes back, starts laying eggs in that colony. So by the time we get that nuke, the older bees have passed. All the offspring in that nuke is from that queen, or nearly all of it.
And I think that alone is something people should pay a little extra for if there's a price difference between nukes. I can't tell for sure. You have to just ask each person who produces.
You do need to ask the question. I belong to the bee club here in Seattle, Puget Sound Beekeepers Association, and they vet their vendors, the people that they allow to speak to the club, to make sure that they follow specific guidelines when it comes to nukes. And some terminology about queens and packages and things like that. But they're trying to make it consistent, which I think is a good thing. At least for the club members, they're trying to make it consistent.
And that's available on their public website. We don't try to do that. We just have a master list of Western Washington, and we just list anybody who says they have bees and just say you should ask them the following questions. Check out their website, ask as many questions as possible before you pick up the bees, and then when you pick up the bees, you can ask some more, but you should ask most of your questions, do your research before that. But yes, PSBA, Puget Sound Beekeepers, they have their list of vetted beekeepers, and they don't list people they have not checked out.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, but it's a much smaller list, for example, than what we published.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that explained it to Paul. Okay, any other questions? If not for Dave, then on anything else? We're getting down. Well, not everybody here is super experienced. I was going to say almost everybody here is super experienced. Anybody have a question they're afraid to ask? Hey, after I admitted that I've lost queens because I can't get the stupid cork out and put the marshmallow in, which now I'm an expert at, but I don't need to do it, and managed to lose one with direct release. Now that I've admitted that, anyone should be able to admit anything, okay? Nope. The end of true confessions there.
Oh, I'll admit something, because I've made every mistake there is in the book, for sure. In my backyard, I have hives scattered all over the city, but I have what I call my problem children in the backyard, because they're my smaller hives taking into winter. They're just troubled little nukes and things like that. So I have them in my backyard so I can keep an eye on them all winter. Well, I let one starve to death. That I swore years ago I was never going to let that happen. And here this winter, it happened. Clearly a nice thriving little nuke that ran out of food, and I did not stay on top of it. I took it apart, butts sticking out of all the cells, no honey. I mean, it was pathetic on my part.
January 20th, a friend helped me because it was still really too cold to be going in, but she helped me go and check. And I have a lot of small clusters, and they're smaller than I recommend in the beginner class that you do it the safest way, a deep's worth of bees, a deep's worth of stores, or as close to that as you can get. Well, we're trying to get a fast start every spring and have plenty of queens because we're doing these queen raising workshops every year. And I may have to rethink this strategy, but double nukes and small size colonies overwintered great a year ago. Last fall, we got hit by yellow jacket predation, and it knocked the numbers of the already small colonies down. And so I have very small colonies left. But when I checked them on January 20th, it was amazing how many colonies were running out of food because it had been so warm and sunny, and they could collect pollen, but they couldn't really collect nectar. And once the knotweed's over, as far as I know, there's not a good fall nectar source. There's pollen, and so they were running out. But even the pollen sub patties, they were running out at January 20th. So I want to get back in again. There's a mic on here that says maybe he'll be available to help me on Friday. Just sit there and move fast, because it's still not going to be that warm. That I really want to be in with small colonies. Bigger colonies, you have more leeway. But these colonies, I could tell from the broodminder sensors. Do you use anything like broodminder sensors? Have you found anything helps other than good old beekeeping know-how?
I don't own any brood minders.
Haven't done any of that techie
No.
stuff?
No.
No need.
My colonies are scattered. I have close to 40 different locations. So, no, the only ones I watch closely are the ones that I call my problem children, and those are the ones in my own backyard.
So is it okay to ask why 40 locations? Because I mean, I tried one out apiary and decided that was not for me.
Yeah, it's at the beginning I said my business is a multifaceted business. So I have a lot of hives, but one of the things that allows me to have a lot of hives within the city limits of Seattle and Bellevue is that I have just a couple hives in people's backyards, and I run a service called hive hosting, and it's kind of a yard service. And so it's for people that want to have pollination, or they're interested in honeybees, but they don't necessarily want to own those bees. So I own the bees, I own the equipment. They pay me X amount of money to have those hives there. They get some honey from their own backyard, but if I'm a good beekeeper, I get the rest, and so I sell that honey. So that's why I have hives all over. And the way I check them during the season is just have a route. And it takes me about 3 to 4 days to check all my hives. I'll do all my east side hives one day. I live in West Seattle, and I have a bunch of hives in West Seattle. I'll do all those in a single day. Then I have a whole bunch on the north end as well. And I just make kind of a circular route out of the whole thing.
About 5 years ago, there was a big surge of interest in hive hosting, hive consulting, and such. And I noticed that a lot of those stores or businesses no longer do it. It was too much work to try to bring it together.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. But I have like a Renton location that I have a few hives, and I've got a Sammamish location that I have a couple of hives, more than just 2 in people's backyards. But generally, it's been a way for me to have a lot of hives and produce a lot of honey that I sell and have them in the confines of a city. That's the only way that I can do it. So it's my bee work is full-time work throughout the year. Like right now, I'm building gear and fixing gear, but I'm also selling bees. A lot of talk back and forth from my supplier, a lot of coordination. It's an involved process.
So is this a full-time business for you?
It is.
Oh my goodness, because I thought that you had to have like hundreds of thousands of bees or something.
Well, I don't do, so number one, I'm not rich, but I don't do pollination. Like I do not move my bees around. But everything I do is professionally is related to some aspect of beekeeping. And so there's hive hosting, there's consulting. I do consulting. I sell bees. That's a big part of my first quarter. And I have other like side gigs. Like I'm the beekeeper for the city of Bellevue. They've got some observation hives in a city park, so I do things like that.
So are those seasonal hives that they put out like they do at the Arboretum in
Is
Seattle?
it Kelsey Creek?
What's that?
Oh, are you doing it at Kelsey Creek Park?
Yeah, it's at Kelsey Creek. Do you know it?
Yes, I used to go there as a kid, and they had observation hives, and I was just talking to them about that they have a beekeeper again. That's exciting.
Yeah, I hear that was the guy that ran those ran it successfully for a long time. I think he's passed now, and then they let it let the program drop. But now they have, you should go back and see what they have now. It's a pretty cool observation hive, one of a kind thing. There's two different ones, but they're back there now.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Kelsey Creek is, it used to be a working farm, I suppose, back when Bellevue was the country, and it's been incorporated as a working farm and as a city park. It's part of the Bellevue City Park system. And they have a lot of, especially in the summer workshops for kids. A lot of families and kids that come through. They have horses and sheep and goats and chickens on the property. They have a big sheep shearing festival that happens last weekend in April. So it's a really wonderful place.
Say, Dave, do you happen to know anybody who makes observation hives, the kind that people keep? Like, I would love to have one for the apiary. And of course, you got to keep it close to like a room temperature. Although maybe super insulated, I'm thinking maybe in a shed that does not go down to freezing. It might be possible to keep one through the winter with insulated panels on the side. Do you know anybody who makes those multiples, like 4 deep frames high type glass observation hives?
I know a guy that could make those. The guy that designed and made the Kelsey Creek hives is a gentleman from Bellevue. He's quite a woodworker. That's not his full-time job. I think he runs some sort of sportswear business, but he designed and built the Kelsey Creek hive. Now it is a one-of-a-kind hive, and I can tell you it's a very expensive hive, like 20 grand.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so
okay, I have to go see this.
Yeah, it's pretty high-tech hive. And you know what the public sees is just the observation window, and it's in a little outbuilding. So when I'm working the hives, I have to go inside the outbuilding to work the hives. And that's where you see the beauty of the hive. It's set up on a single pole, and it's got these big lines of frames that open like the pages of a book. I mean, it's a super interesting hive, and the public doesn't really see that unless I'm working it and they can peek inside the door or something like that. So a lot of it's behind the scenes. But this is also an experiment for us, and I'm sorry to say both hives died, but we have the building set up so it doesn't get colder than 40 degrees inside the building, like 35 to 40 degrees. So we're maintaining a temperature, and partially the idea was to just make it, because the hive's not insulated. There was all sorts of unknowns about air circulation and insulation and there's a long exit. They go through a 6-foot tube to get out of the hive. You know, there were all sorts of unknowns about the hive. But part of what we set up was where the hive actually is a little warmer than the ambient temperature outside frequently. But like I said, they didn't make it through this first year, so we'll try it again next spring.
Yeah, I've got to go see it now. And I haven't been to Kelsey Creek since my kids were little, and I used to take them there. But I don't remember an observation hive at that time. But then I wasn't keeping bees, so. Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Do you know why it died out? Are you thinking it was just too much? A 6-foot entrance tube, a low temperature right around the sides?
You know, we don't know. You know, because it's an unconventional hive. You know, I did mite control on it. I just used Formic, but because it's not a box stacked up like a Langstroth hive is, the distribution of the Formic might have been a little different. We have it also set up that I could stick an oxalic vaporization wand through a specific opening that we made the right size to do that. We're a little wary about dispersing oxalic acid vapor where there's people walking around, and also we basically have to apply it on the inside of this little building. So we'd have to make really sure that we were properly protected. You know, I don't know the reason why it died. When I put the formic on, which was end of August, both hives were booming. We're doing all right anyway. They were good hives, solid hives. And they had started with no foundation, or they had 5 frames of foundation because we started them as nucs. But they had built out, I think those hives hold 24 frames. They had drawn out 24 frames. I mean, they were looking like good colonies. And I put on that formic, they made it through the formic. And then shortly after that, they just started to crash.
Yeah, hard to tell. Yeah, when I've done formic in like 4-frame nucs stacked up, doing the double nuc overwintering, and it didn't distribute correctly. Yeah. So I would have to reduce the amount I used, but yeah, I lost queens when I did that. And it's the only time I've ever lost queens using, I'm sorry, did I say formic oxalic acid? No, I did it both ways. I did do a formic acid and I lost them, but the oxalic was okay. It was the formic acid. And I tried to, distribute it, figure out where the brood was and not use more than the cubic, but it still didn't flow correctly when I did the formic. Yeah, the oxalic was okay. And that does sort of distribute, so that makes sense. Okay. But I hadn't thought that you could keep observation hives at something that went down to like 40 degrees. But did you say these Page, like the Huber hive of history?
Well, I don't know what that is, but these hives hold 24 frames. So they have like 6 pages of a book that spin outwards.
The famous guy Huber, who was basically blind and he studied bees, he had it had the pages of a book, and I've seen that occasionally on observation hives. So and somehow the bees live with it.
I ran, and this is one of these side gigs I've had through the years. I managed or helped manage. There's an observation hive at Seattle Center in the Science Museum, and that one never lived through the winter. It would swarm, and then you've got a swarm on the grounds of Seattle Center. They're problematic just by their very nature. They're problematic. The bees want to be in a dark place, and you've got these open windows and light shining in all the time.
Yeah, it almost seems like you could do tinted glass, couldn't you? Like one way.
Yeah, we have the Kelsey Creek one, I believe, is tinted a little bit, but I'm advocating that it actually have a shade that can be pulled down. So during park hours, maybe that observation shade would be up, but the rest of the time I'd like it to be down and dark. One thing that I find, part of my job is making, hoping that the bees are going to be in the window part of the observation hive so people can see them. And we can draw the bees out there by putting brood out there, and they'll stay close to that window, but as soon as that brood hatches out, they kind of abandon that frame and they go back inside where it's dark.
I remember the old one at Kelsey Creek, you press a button and the wooden doors would slide.
That's right. That when I first got involved in this project, they had the remnants of that hive still there, and they were explaining how it worked, and you're absolutely right. It's like the public controlled the shade that opened and closed.
Good memories.
That's why you came back to have bees. Aha. You were hooked back then.
Yeah, I can blame Kelsey Creek.
Yeah, the Pacific Science Center, yeah, it gave up on keeping bees.
Do they not have it anymore?
One of my members was approached a couple of years ago, and I said, well, I can't take it on. You'd have to do it. And after I explained to him kind of what would be involved, because it's not going to be a perfect setup. No, they were completely redoing the space, and they were interested in having an exhibit, but it would have been just so much work to get somebody down there. And of course, there's no parking in Seattle. It's impossible. And traffic, and we had to find somebody. And a lot of people are retired. This person was retired. And he was thinking that I would do this, and I said, I ain't crazy. I used to work in Seattle. Yeah, so, but they were looking for somebody at the time that they were redoing the exhibits, and I said, gee,
That's
it'd be
interesting.
fascinating, but
You know, that one was a pill to work also. They're by their nature, they're more difficult hives to work. But that one, we had to basically roll sections of the hive outside because they did not want any bees escaping inside the building. And so we had to take them outside if we had to do any manipulation and open them up. And we had to deal with that all outside, just right outside the door at Seattle Center. Always did it early in the morning, and then close them back up, make sure there's no bees hanging on the outside, and wheel the whole thing back in.
that was part of the discussion. They wanted to be absolutely sure that no bees could get in there, and that would require some real engineering, or you take it completely in and out. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I pointed out to the person who thought I should do it that no, I mean, you could do it. Yeah.
They just have to price it to make it worth your while.
Say, do you do any of the rooftop hives around Seattle?
I have. I'm not currently. I'm in negotiations to do one on a development in Wallingford right now, and I kind of hope I get that contract. I know it's a little controversial, but I sort of feel like I'd rather be the one doing it than, because I think I would give it as much care as I could possibly be. I can tell you from going through the application process that you know, the buildings are doing it because it gets them environmental credits, and they don't know the first thing about beekeeping. And you know, they know that they get to put 5 stories on that building instead of 4 stories, and so they're fulfilling all the obligations, but for different reasons than I like to keep bees.
My son works out at South Lake Union, and because I talk a lot of bees, even though he doesn't keep bees, he watches what they're doing on the rooftop of the building that he's security guard for. And he says he knows those bees are not alive. And he's a security guard too, so he can go up there and check and such. And he says they just bring in the bees. The people see them on a few good weather days. They let the bees die out every year. And the people who are paying for the contract have no idea that there are not living bees up there most of the time. And they don't know that they just bring new bees up, and the contract is lucrative enough, apparently, that bringing up another package is not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes bees die, but
they're not even trying. He said it's ridiculous. They're not even making the slightest.
Yeah, so that's why I'd rather be in charge of it than trusting it to someone else. I mean, I have hives in Wallingford, just a few blocks away from this particular development, and I know the bees can do well in Wallingford. You know, it's a bit of a controversy within the club I belong to. Some of the officers are pretty opposed to it, particularly in downtown Seattle. They feel like there isn't enough forage, and that those bees are just being fed constantly. And then, of course, the honey that's being produced is sugar syrup honey, and they just don't think it's a good program.
But Wallingford, that would be enough gardens, enough urban horticulture.
Well, it used to
Ballard
be.
would be too. Ballard has a lot of bees already.
Yeah, so I've kept rooftop bees in both Wallingford and Ballard and downtown. And like Ballard in particular, we're on a rooftop of a restaurant in Old Ballard, and the bees did fine. But one of the things that's happened in Ballard, and it's happening in Wallingford too, is there's so much development that where there used to be an empty lot of blackberries is now a new building. And in Wallingford, there was always a good blackberry flow, and I think it was mostly due to the Burke Gilman Trail. But all that development is all happening along South Lake Union now, so a lot of that forage is also going away, I believe.
Yeah, I would think underneath the freeway, up the hill from South Lake Union. That would probably be a lot of vegetation still, although some of the homeless camps are there, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's changed. It's definitely changed. You know, the first rooftop hive I ever did was on the 12 stories up on the top of the Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle. And you know, we didn't know what to expect. We did it because the chef at the Georgian restaurant in the hotel is a beekeeper, and he wanted, you know, the honey for his food. So we helped him set it up and manage it for just a little while. And what we found out, you know, you're 12 stories up looking down at concrete in downtown Seattle. But if you look east as the bee flies, it's a straight shot to all the gardens on Capitol Hill. And those bees were bringing nectar from somewhere, and you know, they didn't have to fly down to get it. They just had to fly straight to get it.
Yeah, that's neat.
Well, I'm a bit of a bee farmer, and I get up early, so
Yes.
I'm going to call it quits for tonight.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.